Good evening. This is Laws 11057, Introduction to Law. It's week 12 of Term 3, 2014-2015. Tonight we'll be talking about the examination, what's in the exam, some tips to go with that for your studies. We have a number of people online. Please feel free to interrupt, ask any questions, and by all means use the chat facility for any questions that might come to mind if you'd prefer to ask that way. The exam format is hopefully familiar to all of you at this stage. Sorry. The exam question, in my attempt to mute someone, I've muted myself, sorry. The exam format requires you to answer 6 of 7 questions, and each one is worth 10 marks. So it's tough in the sense that you only get to discard one of those questions. We do know that one of the questions will be a redrafting exercise. There have been examples of those in past papers. In essence, there'll be 400 words or thereabouts of gobbledygook, and you'll be asked to redraft that into 100 words or less. That's going to be question number 2 on the paper. There will be a question about separation of powers. That will be question number 1 on the paper. So we know that. There are a number of other things that you should consider and pay close attention to. You would have noticed that common law is a term that's used extensively throughout this course, but it's used in 3 different ways. It's used to contrast it from legislation. It's used to contrast it to equity. And it's, Marie, I'll just get you to mute your microphone if you would for me. Thank you. Thank you, Marie. And it's used in different ways as well. So common law versus legislation, common law versus equity, common law versus civil law, talking about common law jurisdictions and civil law jurisdictions. So given that this term common law is used in a number of different ways, you might expect that there might be a question about common law, and probably typically that would be asking you to contrast common law with something else. In the early part of the lectures, we talked about equity. We talked about the historical development of equity and common law. And we talked about the way in which equity has survived beyond this early split with or distinction between common law. And we talked about equitable principles. So there might be some questions about what is meant by equity, what do we mean by equitable remedies, give some examples and explain. Throughout the course, I've talked about legislation, how legislation comes into being. What are the different types of legislation? What do we mean by delegated legislation or subordinate legislation? How does that fit into the scheme of things? We've talked about judicial activism in a number of ways, particularly historically through the Mabo decision. That touches upon an issue regarding separation of powers as well, and you might wish to make comment about that if you're answering a question about that. We have, throughout the course, and not just exclusively at the end, talked about research skills, and I'm very appreciative to Peter and Catherine and Michael for their work in presenting very well different modes of undertaking research online. Undertaking a legal research skill when we're in the digital age and you're answering a question with paper and pen is difficult to ask. So there won't be a lot of questions, if any questions, about legal research skills, but there could be. I'm very keen for you to think logically and critically about your studies. there's been a big emphasis, and I think quite rightly so, in this course, on dealing with your reactions to various things that you read. I'm not that interested in having you simply repeat material that's in the book. One of the advantages of an open book exam is that you have all the material available to you at your fingertips. One of the disadvantages, of course, is that you must go beyond simply repeating that information. And given that it's an open book exam, the reality is that you'll be marked to a higher standard than if it was a closed book exam which relied much more on memory. So what do I mean by you'll be marked to a higher standard? Well, it means that you must comment upon your reading to a degree, providing that commentary. And most of you have completed your blogs. You've had your reflective thoughts. Many of you have each week answered the questions which are required of you. And all of that will hold you in very good stead when it comes to the exam. I'm very keen on having you prepare yourself for the things that you might need to undertake if you're practicing in law. So we've talked about this concept of thinking about what you need to achieve and working backwards, and critically thinking about the planning process, determining what it is that you need to do from a practical and legal perspective to ensure that you're ready to go. So there might be some questions about taking instructions, there might be some questions about appearing in court, and these might be practical, legal and ethical, all mixed in together. There might be some questions about how you go about maintaining proper equilibrium. So things like how you deal with management of your studies and work with all the other commitments that go with it. So there might be some issues about self-management skills. I've been very keen to ensure that we think very critically about communication in all sorts of ways. You know, there's a question about communicating in a written form on the paper. That's the redrafting exercise. But there might be other things that will be on the paper to test your ability to communicate effectively in oral as well as written form. I've wanted you to think critically in the legal context, and as indicated, that's been reflected in some of the questions that have gone through. Lawmaking, how do laws come into existence? Access to justice is another area that we've touched upon at some length. How do you feel about people having access or not having access to justice? How does that impact on the legal system? And of course, one of my favourites is always the brainstorming type exercise. How can you provide the holistic advice to the client? How do you think about these different issues from the outset? All right, I know that's a lot in terms of some tips on the examination. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask through the chat facility or come in live and ask. Otherwise, we'll move on and talk about the practicalities of the exam. The exam is... Yes, Erin?
I think I might have scared Carolyn away.
Oh, have we lost Carolyn?
She didn't have a microphone muted, and she's disappeared altogether now.
Oh, okay. All right, not to worry. Hopefully she'll join us again. Thanks, Erin. Now, Kelly, did you want to ask a question? No? All right, well, let's move on then. For the examination...
Sorry, John. Sorry, I had a bit of trouble then with my mic.
You're right, Kelly.
I just wanted to ask you, you said on one of the recordings once that you could build a skeleton answer, and I was just wondering what that meant. I'm not sure if that's a bit of a silly question.
No. What you can do is absolutely this. You know there's going to be a question on separation of powers, so you can create an answer almost ready to go, explaining separation of powers for me. I don't mind. I mean, if you've got it completely written and you just simply rewrite it in the exam, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. So you can prepare by having little yellow stickers in your book, or by making dot points, or going further and writing full answers to exam questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mind you, of course, there's probably going to be a little twist or an emphasis on the exam question, and you may have to change tack in that regard.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
All right. Now, there's been some questions about the gobbledygook redrafting exercise. And what we want you to do is have a look at past examination papers. I think all of you have received the link on how to access past exams, and it'll be very much along those lines. Question about how many words per question. There is no maximum, there is no minimum. If you believe that you can adequately answer the question in 100 words, then fine, but I don't think that would be possible. I expect for most people with average handwriting, you'd probably write perhaps 2 pages per question. But that can vary so much depending on the content and also, of course, your handwriting. And that won't apply for the redrafting exercise. That'll be 100 words maximum. Okay, you're not allowed to take in electronic devices. I think you've all read the rules in that regard, what you can take in, what you can't take in. Essentially, the main thing is that you can't take in something which will allow you to access the internet. But you can take in textbooks. You can. I don't mind if you take in a briefcase full of material. If that helps you, then that's fine. Okay. Academic writing. For the redrafting exercise, can you include words that don't appear in the text? Absolutely. Yes, if you wish to redraft by including alternate words, then please do so. Academic writing, that requires the use of more formal language than is used in everyday speech. I have been keen to ensure that where possible, we improve the quality of our writing, and there are some simple tips. Use short sentences. That makes it easier. Avoid abbreviations. Don't contract words. So don't include words like don't. Don't use shorthand. Obviously, I'm very keen on spelling, grammar, and punctuation. That will not change. I'll still be looking for that during the exam. If you don't know already, and you know that separation of powers is in the exam, please spell separation correctly. It's got an A, not an E. You will lose marks if you don't get that right, because it suggests to me that you haven't read so carefully. Before you start to compose a response to your assessment item or your exam item, it is careful that you take a moment to analyse the question or the topic or the task that you're addressing. And I'm paraphrasing material which is contained in the Great Guide to University Study. If you haven't accessed that and it's accessible through Moodle, I'd urge you to do so. That particular hint was from topic number 5, which is developing academic writing skills. Also from that topic, another hint, a good set of notes will help with the writing of essays and ensure that everything is said in your own words. Students who do not take lecture notes often end up copying material from books. That can lead to plagiarism, and you must be careful not to plagiarise in the exam. I will admit candidly that I don't have the benefit of Turnitin, the program that makes it very easy for course coordinators to detect plagiarism when the materials are lodged electronically. But I'm pretty familiar with the work, and it won't take me long to spot plagiarism. By all means, you can reference material that you source elsewhere. That doesn't change from the normal rule. But if you do reference, unlike a normal assignment where I'm insisting on footnotes and it must be referenced formally, my main objective in the exam is that if you do draw something from other material, and if it wasn't referenced, it would be plagiarism, then please reference in some way. If you want to do Harvard referencing, then that's fine too. Question about where we write the answers. There will be a book supplied, and if you run out of room in that book, you just ask for a second book. So probably 1 in 4 students would provide me with 2 books. Question here about writing a plan for exam question. So if we write down a plan for each exam question per se prior to actually commencing the exam, can we include this in the final paper? So if you prepare now, absolutely, you can include all of that material. If you prepare your question, your plan, you can include that as part of your question, your answer if you prefer, or you can have it on the separate sheet and leave it there. That's a matter for you. Use complete sentences and use precise language. So law is all about communication, and we want to ensure that the communication is solid and acceptable. So I make no apologies that that is part of the assessment criteria as far as I'm concerned. As a guide, and I'm reading from topic number 5 again from the Great Guide to University Study, aim for less than 30 words per sentence, and I think that's a good rule of thumb. Make effective use of time during the exam. Time will pass quickly, so use it effectively. Take time before you begin and regularly throughout. Read the whole exam before you begin, and I think that's important. You should know the 6 questions that you're going to answer probably before you start answering any of them. Think about how long you wish to spend on each question. Maybe have a game plan worked out. Maybe you'll do question 1 dealing with separation of powers and question 2 being the redrafting exercise first, or maybe you'll keep them till last. So think about those issues. But allocate the time, have your watch ready or your clock or whatever it might be, and keep track of where you're at. Do write legibly, but don't be precious about it. I'm not concerned about the quality of your handwriting, provided I can read what's there, and I can guess some of the words if they're illegible. So I'm more interested in the content than laboriously making your handwriting neat and tidy. But do try to write legibly. Leave time at the end to think about all the questions and go back. Now, if you become a bit overwhelmed, just take your time, take a deep breath, and try and collect your thoughts. Now, remember that saying about lawyers remaining calm when everyone else is panicking. You're training for the most part to be lawyers, at least that's the way I'm structuring this course. So remember that when you're under stress in the examination. There may be different words that are used to describe the nature of the task. You might be asked to analyse or consider. But if you look at the word analyse, which is quite common, there are a number of synonyms in the standard thesaurus. For example, examine, study, evaluate, consider, and investigate. There are some differences between those words, but essentially what they're asking you to do is make an assessment and state various aspects that are important in relation to that particular topic. If I ask you for a critical evaluation, that will usually require you to provide arguments and counter-arguments, weighing up the respective benefits and detriments of 2 or more approaches. You may be asked alternatively to argue a position, probably not so much for introduction to law, but this would come later in the course in different subjects. So your essay may require you to deal with a particular problem and generate a number of potential solutions. Now, that part may well be on the paper because I'm very keen on you generating potential solutions for consideration by a client. You may close with an ultimate conclusion, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the case. All right. Is the hardest subject in law, is this the hardest subject in law with its large spectrum? Is one question. Hope so is one comment. I hate to dampen your spirits, and don't be discouraged by this, but this is probably going to be one of the easier subjects. Sorry, but you'll be right. You'll get there. You're doing well. Now, when you answer, you need to map out your approach. Generally speaking, any answer will have an introduction, it will have a body, and it will have a conclusion. So that's generally the way people write an assignment. It's a little bit like IRAC, really. You just have a formula to approach it. IRAC has an introduction where we're trying to identify the issues, then we're dealing with the rules, applying those rules, and then coming to the conclusion. So there's some similarity between that and what I'm saying in a normal sense, where we have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So the introduction, of course, provides some background. It maybe provides some comment as to why this issue is serious, and perhaps provide an overview. Then you get into the body, and there may be a number of components in the body. You need to explain, perhaps link, contrast these components, and it gives you then the opportunity to refer to any legislation or case law that you think might be relevant. And once you've completed the body of the paper, you then round off with a conclusion, which is typically providing a little summary and maybe a justification for your conclusion. You're not going to have a lot of time to develop all this in the exam situation, but that's generally the way you would structure your paper. Do you remember right back the very first thing I said? What do you prefer? The words communicate simply and effectively, or that long rambling discussion that I had? Well, same for the exam. Try and keep it to the point. Avoid long-winded, wandering answers. On the other hand, do try to avoid short dot point summaries unless you believe that there's good reason to do so for emphasis. Really, it's a matter of developing your arguments logically. Now, this is really important. Remember that the first 50% of marks will be achieved far more easily than the second 50%. Remember also that the most difficult 20% of marks will be the final 20%. That's where it's the hardest. So it always amazes me, and it always happens every year. People will send me 4 or 5 answers and they won't send me 6. For goodness sake, even if you know practically nothing about a topic, at least put in something, because those first few marks, they're pretty easy to collect. Don't waste time in repeating the question. I know what the question is, so I don't expect you to rewrite it for me. That's just wasting time. It actually looks to me like you're covering up because you've got nothing much to say, so you're just filling in some time. So it can actually be a negative as well as time consuming. Any marks for participation in the exam? No, sorry. You actually have to do something, but nice try, nice question. Write professionally, watch your grammar, state your conclusion, argue in favour of it. And look, I would suggest that you proofread. You might have to silently read each word, but I would recommend that you do that. Now, there's a question about critically analysing, and a question on previous paper about mandatory sentencing says to critically analyse. Does this mean to state the pros and cons and what you think about the topic? Absolutely. Certainly it requires you to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages, and I think it's appropriate when you're required to critically analyse to add in your own commentary as well. But do so carefully and guardedly, but there's nothing wrong with that at all. All right, so that's what I propose to do in terms of an overview for examination writing techniques. There's a comment here. I have a binder as well as books. Is there going to be enough room on my desk? To be honest, I don't know the logistics of how the room will look. Has anyone sat through CQU exams and can tell me what the room layout will look like? I've said you can take in a briefcase or a suitcase of things.
I think it's just a desk. I think it's just a desk, John, but I wouldn't be sure of that. Okay. Usually you can put books and things under your desk anyway, or beside your desk.
Okay, thank you. All right,
I agree with that, Erin. Usually it's just the one desk. I have sat some exams where they realised that we do need more space and they've actually put a second desk next to us. I don't know if this will be the case.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Peter. If corrections need to be made, is whiteout acceptable? Whiteout's fine, but to be honest, I'd prefer you to simply cross it out and rewrite. I won't look at what you'd written that you've crossed out, so don't be too concerned about it. No mobile phones are allowed in the exam, sorry, because that will give you access to the internet and we can't have that. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm not sure if the mobile phone can stay in your bag or in the side of the room. Yes, I think that would be fine. Phone a friend. I would probably not even take the phone into the room if it were me. Are there any other questions? Anybody wish to make any comments? Okay. Well, I think we're done on the exam. We've got something else to do, Peter and Catherine. Can you remind me what it is? Dragon, says Maria. Typing. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Moonwalk. No, we won't be doing any moonwalking, but... All right. Now, we need someone to select a passage for typing. And what do you think we do, Peter and Catherine? Do we just go one at a time? Or do we all go together with a go?
Pete thinks he's a good typist, so let him have a go.
Yes. Catherine seems pretty proficient too.
I think once we've picked a passage, we can all just start at the same time and see how we go.
All right. Well, you might have to mute, because I'll be talking, so I'll mute myself. How does that sound?
That would be good, because otherwise I was going to be muting you. So.
Okay. Well, when we start, I'll mute, and you'll just, and I'll screen save so you can see my screen. How does that sound?
Yeah, that'll be good.
Right.
If you want to make it a little bit even more classy, I'm actually going to be doing it in a Google Docs thing online. So I could actually give you the link and you can actually see me typing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure how we do that, but yes. Okay. Now, has someone got a passage they want to see us type? I've got it open at page 228, but that's only just because it happened to open at 228. I haven't been practicing. Okay. All right, where's Catherine? Who else is going to go in this?
I'm going to find my book.
As many as you like can go in this. I've just suggested page 228. There's a paragraph under interpretation skills. And we could type the first paragraph if that's not too tedious. How does that sound? Actually, it's probably a bit long.
Yeah.
How about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? How about down to the words by the insurance policy, which is on about the 7th line?
Yeah, okay, yep.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it seems fine.
Am I just type it into Word and just seeing how far I get?
Yes. Yeah, well, all right, so I'll screen save so you can watch my screen, and then we'll need someone to tell us when to start. So I'll just share screen. Can everyone see my screen now? Yep, okay. All right, and I've got to find the mute button, sorry. I'm just having trouble finding the mute button. Sorry. Can anyone help me here?
Bottom
there, I've got it. I've got it. Okay, so who's going to start us off and say go? We're starting on page 228. There's a heading called Interpretation Skills. we're typing the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines and 4 words into the 7th line by the insurance policy.
So we just need to pick someone who's going to tell us when to start and when to stop.
And then we go. All right. So we're ready to start? Who said that?
Yeah, go.
Okay.
All right, Josh, should we chuck in some distraction? Is distraction not helping, or?
I don't know, man. It's up to you.
Put some music on.
Done.
Well done, Catherine.
You're not showing yours.
Yeah, I stopped probably 3 words after Catherine.
Yeah.
And I do have some spelling mistakes to fix up. I
Right.
was focusing on typing and accuracy.
I've got 2, I think, as well.
And can I just, I put my cursor in the wrong place. So I went through it all once, nothing appeared at all, and then I started again. But I didn't beat you. So that's part of it. If you don't have the cursor in the right spot, Dragon doesn't work at all. Okay,
No,
thank you very much.
I also had to close the sharing stuff on mine, so I had about another 10 seconds to get started.
Well, I guess we're full of excuses. We'll just have to declare Catherine absolutely the winner. Thank you, Catherine.
I think you need a legal secretary instead.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for bearing with us on that. Okay. Now, are there any questions before we finish for tonight?
Yes, John. Me
Yes.
again.
Yes, Erin.
Remember I asked you, I think it was online or might have been on one of the sessions about, I thought I'd read somewhere about appeals can be on fact as well as law.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Mhm.
If I had a look, I was reading through the other day, page 167, under the table, it's got 5, 6 lines, 5 or so lines there about that.
Okay. On page 167 of the New Lawyer, are you saying?
Yes.
On page 167, oh, I see, at the top table, where it says,
Yes.
in its appellate jurisdiction, an intermediate court sometimes hears appeals from the lower courts in relation to issues regarding sentence and questions of fact. Yeah, I think my answer was that almost always it would be a question of law. Certainly there are appeals on sentence, dealing with the severity of the sentence imposed. But as for an appeal on a question of fact, that has got me puzzled. And I'm not sure how I can respond to that. I'm sorry. Does anyone have any suggestions?
Would that be an instance that not all the facts were provided or there was a mistake?
Yes, that could be an instance. It might be that there's been an oversight. That really comes down to perhaps competence issues. But beyond that, I really don't know. And the reason that I'm saying that I don't know is that in a jury trial, it is the jurors who are arbiters of fact, and their decisions are confidential. Their process is confidential as well. It's different in a magistrate's court, where a magistrate typically will make decisions in relation to both law and fact. So perhaps it could be that an appeal court hears a matter on the basis that the magistrate erred in coming to a conclusion regarding facts which were not readily sustainable based on the evidence which went before him or her. But it's not something that I'm certainly familiar with. So I'm sorry I can't expand on that to any further degree, Aaron, but I will consider it more. If I come up with something, I'll let you know. But thank you for that, Peter. There is a question about the grading system for assessments. Just generally speaking, if you achieve a result of 85% or more, then that's a HD. If you're in that range of 75 to 84, that's a distinction. If you're in the range of 65 to 74, that's a credit, and 50 to 64 is a pass. So by combining the by just converting the ratios, then you'll know. Who got the 20? Yeah, I did award 120, but I won't tell you that. No, I'm not saying anything on the screen that would give a hint as to who that was. All right, but
you'll have to get a confidentiality waiver from them first.
Yes, that's right. Okay. All right. Well, I think that will probably do us for tonight. Are there any questions that anyone has in relation to the exam or the course generally?
John?
Yes.
I have one question. I was just wondering, the exam is weighted, is it 60%? Is that correct?
The exam is 60%. That's right.
Yeah, so just I was wondering, I've got a few friends at uni and they've got an exam. If you pass a certain percentage, you won't actually fail the subject. But if we were to, how do I say it? Is there like a threshold that we need to pass in order to pass the subject?
No, it's as simple as this. I take your progressive assessment mark, add it to the mark for the examination, and that's your final exam mark. So if, for example, if you're currently on 40 out of 40 and you achieve 11 out of 60 for the exam, you will pass the subject.
Okay.
Conversely, if you're currently sitting on 0 and you achieve a result of 51 out of 60 for the exam, then you will pass.
Okay.
Great, thank you. But that's a good question.
Thank you.
All right.
So John, what you're saying is it's not just necessary to get a pass in every part of the assessment. It's an overall pass of 50 for everything combined.
Yep.
Yeah, from the looks of the course profile, it just says you need to get 50% overall for the course. There's no mention of passing the exam or individual assessments.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. All right. Well, I can just say that I will provide those results fairly quickly after the exam. The exam is next week, isn't it? Does anyone know what day of the week it is?
Thursday.
Yeah, next Thursday.
All right. Which is a bit unfortunate because I probably won't get the papers to mark over the weekend, which is always my preference. So on one occasion, I was up till, I think, 3 a.m. to get those papers marked and back on time. So I'll be braced and ready for it. But you'll get your results hopefully fairly quickly. Okay, well, we might wrap it up. I'll stop the recording soon. And I just want to say I've really enjoyed being the course coordinator for this group. It has been very well, the course has been very well supported, and I do appreciate it. Don't forget to put in your feedback if you haven't already done so. All the best.